you see somebody, go ahead and get started.
Move him over. You can go ahead and get started.
Ready. So David, if you want to call the meeting to order, we can proceed from there.
It's 2 minutes after 6, so we have a quorum. I call the meeting of Albemarle's Agricultural-Forestal District Advisory Committee to order.
Ready. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to come. I need, before we get started, to read the virtual meeting preamble. So I'll take just a minute to do that. And when I'm done, I'll call the roll of the committee members present. There's Ron. And you can just say present or here and give your general location. We don't need your exact location, but at my home or at my office in Albemarle County or Charlottesville, it's fine. So because of the COVID-19 pandemic continuation, this meeting is being held electronically over the Zoom platform. It is authorized by Albemarle County's Declaration of Local Emergency, the county's Continuity of Government Ordinance, and Virginia Code Section 2.2-3708.2A3. The Agricultural-Forestal District's advisory members are participating electronically. The public has real-time audio-visual access to this meeting over Zoom, and real-time audio access over telephone. Both is provided in the lawfully posted meeting notice. During the meeting, members from the public may submit written questions or comments to the facilitator through Zoom. The public is also invited to send questions, comments, and suggestions to the advisory committee through the county's Community Development Office at any time. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the Albemarle County website. All committee members participating electronically will identify themselves and state their general physical location during the roll call. I will do. Alrighty, so Mr. Bear.
Present from my home in Albemarle County.
Thank you. Mr. Goldberg.
Present from my home in Albemarle County.
Keller.
Can't hear you, Scott. Who did you say?
Mr. Keller.
Present from my home near Simeon in Albemarle County.
Okay. Ms. Kirchner.
Present from my home in Albemarle County.
And Mr. Lynch is not here. Ms. Malik.
Present from my home in Earlysville and at Northwest Albemarle County.
Mr. Paul.
Present from my home here in Albemarle County.
Ms. Sudfin. Here we go. I believe she's planning to attend. Mr. Filk.
Present from my home office in Albemarle.
Great. And just mention that we are, of course, down one member since Ms. Volkan resigned last month, and hopefully we'll get someone to fill that position soon. All right, so that is internal business, and I'll just put up the agenda so we can move on. Mr. Powell, we can go on to the approval of minutes item. Oh, sorry, I don't have that up, do I? Let me try again to share my screen.
Well, Scott's fighting the technical gremlins. We've our next order of business is the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. So I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes as written, or discussion about needed changes or additions.
There are no further changes. I move adoption of the minutes from the last meeting.
I have any seconds?
I second.
Do we need to actually take a vote, Scott, or is this just approval?
Yeah, we'll need to do a voice vote. Apologize for that, but can't really do voice votes online and keep track of what everybody says. So,
Okay.
Mr. Bear,
Yes.
Goldberg,
Yes.
Mr. Keller,
Yes.
Ms. Kirchner,
Yes.
Ms. Malik,
Yes,
Mr. Powell,
Yes.
and Mr. Vilk.
I'll abstain since I was away from the meeting. I think I was in Colorado that day.
That's fine. So that passes 6-0 with 1 abstention.
Sounds great. Thank you. So at this point, I guess we'll dive right into the remaining agenda. And the first or next item on the agenda is the Reclaimed Hope Initiative project. Scott?
Thank you. Give me just a moment here. Shift a couple of windows around.
Hey, apologies, Scott, while you're doing that, do we need to tweak the minutes from last meeting? Showing Mr. Volk as present and also absent. Although
Oops.
maybe that's
Yeah, I'll
Catch,
fix that.
Ron. Thank you.
kind of a Heidegger's cat situation there, but
It's a good trick.
we have a magician in our midst. That's fabulous. I need to learn how to do that.
Clone yourself.
Alrighty. So thank you for that correction. I'll make sure that gets done and move on to the first item of business, which is the Reclaimed Hope Initiative Special Use Permit request. And wanted to mention that Mariah Gleason, who is the lead planner on this project, is also here to help correct me when I get things wrong and add to the details. And hopefully between us, we'll get you all the information you need. So this is a special use permit request for properties located within a Ag 4 district. You all have seen probably more of these in the last year or two than the committee has seen in the last 10 years. I'm not sure why that is. But again, this is one that's actually located within a district. Parcels 88, 23, and 23E. It's about 54 acres in the hardware district. I should also mention that Paul and Bettina Stevens, you'll see, are also here. They're the applicants, so they can also help by answering any questions you may have once we get to the discussion portion. So, summary of their request is that they are hoping to do day camp and boarding camp uses, which are permitted by special use permit in the RA zoning district for adoptive, foster, and special needs families. The proposed level of use in the site, fall through spring, essentially would be up to 6 families per week with a maximum of 40 people, including guests and staff. And then June to August, it would operate more as a day camp for the children. And in this case, there would be 65 people maximum on the site, again, children and staff included. Approximately 13,700 square feet of additional development. That's not all in structures. Some of that's parking, swimming pools, basketball courts, things like that. Those would be added to support the proposed uses. There would be additions to the existing residential structure, amenity and gathering buildings, cabins, and a groundskeeper house. These are all.
If I could interject right there, it's 13,715 square feet in building. There are additional amenities proposed that would be in ground and not necessarily be building square feet and in that number, but it would include things like the basketball court and pool that are also represented on the concept plan.
Thanks, Mariah. Appreciate you getting me straight on. So this is an aerial view of the property. You can see it's located on US 29. There's a private road that comes from 29 across the right of way into the property. And then there's the existing house and related structures that you can see from the road. And then up on the hill in the southwest corner, there is another dwelling accessed by a driveway. The applicants submitted a conceptual plan. I should point out this is oriented with north to the right, so this is rotated from what you've been seeing up to this point. Here's 29, here's the entry road. And you can see here that there are the existing structures, which are darker, and then some of these lighter colored structures are what would be proposed for addition to the site. You can see here that essentially everything that's proposed is just within the open areas of the site rather than getting into the wooded areas, many of which are quite steep. The detailed view of the existing structure and proposed structures at the southwest corner of the site, again grouped into the existing open area up on that ridge. And then, the lower area closer to 29, the other open area is where the other structures and uses would be, including, of course, the access to the pond. There's a couple of structures labeled on here as existing, and then there are the structures like the dorms, and then non-structure uses like the parking and pool and all of that. One subject that we've mentioned a few times through the report that you'll have seen is how this impacts important soils on the site. And you'll see that while the open areas extend beyond them, most of the existing structures are located within areas that are tagged as prime or locally important soils in the comp plan. So that's a matter of interest to this committee, I would think. And just an attempt at an overlay here, you can see that some of the proposed structures, not all, would be in some of these locally important soils, whereas some of the cabins and other structures are in this open area farther from the road where the soils are not identified as prime or important for this region. So before we get into the staff analysis of the proposal, I just want to mention a couple of things to remind everyone about how the county's review of special use permits in these districts works. Section 3202 of the county code basically says that properties in the agriculture and forestal districts won't be developed to a more intensive use. It then gives several exceptions from that prohibition. 21-acre subdivisions, dwelling units, any by right usage listed in the ordinance are exempted from that. As part of that, it also exempts uses that are permitted by special use permit, but only provided that the Board of Supervisors determines that the use or structure allowed is consistent with the purposes of this chapter. So that's why we always bring these proposals to you all, is that you all are our expert technical committee on the districts and the purposes and how they do their conservation. So we bring these proposals to you when there's a special use permit involved to get your input to inform the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors on this particular aspect of a special use permit review. It's located in a district. Is it consistent with the purposes of Chapter 3 of the ordinance? And just to remind you again, those purposes are in Section 3-100 of the ordinance. And I won't read them all out to you, but essentially they come down to conserving, protecting, and encouraging the development of agricultural forestal lands for production of food and other agricultural and forestal products, as well as several other purposes: clean air, clean water, wildlife habitat, and for aesthetic purposes. And also to encourage the protection and enhancement of agricultural economies. So those in general terms are the criteria that we use for analyzing any special use permit that's proposed within a district. Now, in staff's initial review of this special use permit request, we did not find that the initial submittal was consistent with the goals and intent of the agricultural and forestal districts. As we do with any special use permit or rezoning application, if there are issues with the initial submittal of an application, rather than saying simply, there are issues, we're done, we need to work through with the applicants to figure out if those are resolvable issues or not. So the next question for tonight is, can this proposal be made consistent through revisions to the proposal? Are there changes the applicants can do that would change that analysis that it is not currently consistent with the purposes of the districts? As part of the general special use permit review, staff has recommended some possible changes that the applicants could make to reduce the proposed uses impacts and perhaps make it more consistent with the purposes of the districts. So our question for tonight for the committee, which will get to your discussion and action after a bit more presentation, is consistency possible with the staff's recommended changes or possibly other additional changes that you all recommend? So for the moment, I will just run through the criteria that we always use for these analyses. And Mariah, please feel free to jump in if I get off track or misrepresent something, but there are 4 criteria, A through D. A is about how a proposal, well, these are essentially more detailed purposes of the district. So one of those purposes is production of food and other agricultural and forestal products. So we would look at how does the proposal affect that? This is not inherently an agricultural use, like perhaps a special use permit for an agricultural processing facility, which is another use by special use permit in this zoning district. It's obviously agricultural in character. This is not necessarily agricultural. It doesn't involve production of food. So our comments to the applicants were more focused on how can this proposal limit any impacts on the future usability of this land for production. Those recommendations included concentrating the new development outside of the best soils in the property and prohibiting land clearing, additional land clearing for this use, not prohibiting forestry, but prohibiting land clearing for development other than what's needed for the entrance and parking for business. The second standard or purpose for the districts is to provide essential open spaces. Recommendations here, again, the property is an essential open space as it is, and it's only somewhat developed state with quite a bit of steep wooded slopes that are important for erosion control and water protection. There is an open space aspect to this in that there would be outdoor activities, but as far as protecting open spaces, it doesn't do that as much. And again, our recommendations were about concentrating development, prohibiting additional land clearing, and for the aesthetic portion, and this has at least as much to do with the entrance corridor as it does with the Ag Forest District, is to move the parking area to an area that's less visible. Criterion C is about a strong agricultural and forestal economy. Again, this is not an agricultural forestal use. It doesn't provide inputs to that economy. The site certainly has some high quality soils on it. It has some mature trees on it. So again, our recommendations to the applicants were things that they could do to limit the extent of their impact, keep those areas available for future uses for either crop production, ongoing commercial forestry, whatever it might be. A lot of these particular recommendations overlap with some non-ag forest district concerns, such as impacts on adjacent properties, which are part of the more general special use permit review process. But again, these include prohibiting additional land clearing, again, prohibiting events like weddings and family reunions, limiting the total numbers on the site as proposed, and not allowing, I'm just sorry, I'm trying to summarize here, so we have a lot to get through. Not allowing overnight stays of day camp or boarding camp participants during the summer months when there's also a day camp going on. And finally, the last criterion is protecting and preserving natural resources and retaining continuous and unfragmented land. Obviously, this use would have impacts on this site. It's already somewhat developed for residential purposes. We would be adding, as Mariah mentioned, both buildings and non-structure development on the site. And there isn't really an ag aspect to this, but we could focus on reducing and limiting the spatial extent of those impacts on the site. So what it comes down to, and I apologize for the ringing phone, staff is seeking guidance from the committee so that we can pass your comments on to the commission and the board for in what way this proposal does not, or could be consistent with the purposes of the districts. We depend on you all as the experts in the advisory committee on these districts and on conservation in the rural areas to advise the commission on the board in those matters. Essentially, there are three options. Option A says that the proposal would be consistent with the purposes of the districts, as is, would provided that staff recommendations were incorporated. Sorry. B would be essentially the same, except that the committee might have additional requirements to suggest. Or C might be to find that the proposal cannot be made consistent due to its character and scale. So we would suggest that you all consider taking one of those actions. And so the next step would be for you all to ask questions and have a discussion. I'll remind you that according to your fairly recent public input policy, what we would do is have the committee discuss first. Then we would invite any members of the public who wish to speak to do so. They may each have 2 minutes to give their position on how this impacts the district. Then we would come back to the committee for a final discussion and hopefully an action. We'll remind you again that Mariah is here to provide more and better details than I have on the use itself. Paul and Bettina Stevens are here as the applicants to respond to any questions you have about the design of the use in more detail or any other questions. And we'll go from there.
Thank you, Scott. I guess I'll lead off the discussion with a quick note to Mariah. Do you have any points that you feel like ought to be added before the committee begins discussion?
I do not.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll kick off a question for Mariah as well as the Stevens. Can you give more detail about the construction and paving originally proposed?
I can start it off. So there are a number of new structures proposed. Those included the cabin, the communal buildings, including the hall, which is meant to be a gathering place, and an event space, and then an additional dwelling for the groundskeeper. There are also some non-building structures which are not included in that 13,700 and I believe 15 feet. And that includes some of those recreation areas that are shown in T and M, F. So it's a pool, a basketball court, gardens, parking, and playground areas. There's so basically activity areas and vehicular areas. There are, if you could advance one slide, the slide preceding this, Scott. Yes, thank you. And then there aren't as many non-structured areas, and the farm is meant to be kind of the adult portion. Their proposal is outlining the this higher portion as the adult portion and the lower area as the more child-oriented portion of the day camp, boarding camp use. just a note, staff is looking at this SP proposal as an additional use on the property that is not user specific, it's use specific. So the way the conditions are written, it's not meant for this Paul and Bettina Stevens and their vision for the property. It's meant for any boarding and day camp use on the property. But I'll pass it to Paul and Bettina in case they would like to add anything or correct me if I misrepresented something.
Yeah, no, good evening, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity. I want to make sure I address the question. Is that what we're looking for, kind of footprint that we would provide new construction? I think the plan does a good job. Most of them would be single-story structures. The house is envisioned to be a multi-story structure. Other than that, yeah, as far as construction details, whether it's a slab on grade or some other supporting structure, I don't know if that's the detail we want to get into, or if it was more just about the footprint.
That was it. Thank you, sir, and thank you, Mariah. Any other questions from the board?
Go ahead, Ann.
Similar line. So I wrote down as the presentation was going on and having read the staff report where the fire department will need to have paved access roads to within 150 feet of any residence. I would like to know what the area is that is going to be hardscaped regarding that. It looks as if there's quite a long new driveway that would be added up to this adult section that's shown on screen right now. And am I correct that there are cabins in both places, the adult place and the child place? That's what all these little red squares are, I'm assuming. So I think.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I thought you could finish, Ann. You get the right to finish the question. There's two parts so far that I got.
Go ahead with those two parts and then I'll follow up again if I have to. Thank you.
10-4. Yeah, I'll answer the second one. Those are not intended to be cabins. There would only be cabins on the more child-centric lower portion. That is the emergency vehicular access path. And I just want to be clear, and as far as paving versus able to support an emergency vehicle, I think I'm correct in that it has to be able to support an emergency vehicle. It doesn't necessarily have to be paved, with asphalt that is not permeable. There are different options out there. The existing driveway that you see in white here is a gravel driveway up to the upper house. Our intent would be to do as little as we had to in order to make that a traversable path for an emergency vehicle. And then any of the stuff in red where we are having to get within 150 feet of the structures would be some type of permeable paver. We would not want that to be we want it to be the least obtrusive as we could. Ideally, we wouldn't have it, but we understand the requirement. So we would try to work that into the landscape. Similar, if you advance a slide, Scott, I think you're in control there. With that red line that comes across, that is a kind of a footpath now, would be a little bit more of a formal path from the kind of house main area over to the kind of beachside lake area. And again, that would be a path that a vehicle could drive on, but our goal would to make it look like and act like a walking path, 99% of the year.
If I could add to that response, some of these aspects are things that we would look at the site planning stage. Fire rescue highlighted them at this stage just to make the applicant aware. But permeable pavers would be acceptable, an acceptable design standard as long as it was able to support the fire emergency vehicles themselves.
Right. I guess as a follow-up, I'm assuming, but could be corrected, that any connection to the beach area where fire and rescue ambulance might need to get would not, a little possibly muddy path in the summertime, is going to need some improvement. I know it's a footpath now, but if there's going to be a collection of activity up there, I think that is something that's going to be have to be addressed. Even for ACFR's ability to use the hydrants and things. They have to have a lot of improvement to the land to be able to get the engine close enough to the site. So I guess those are the kinds of things I'd like some more detail, whether it's doubling the 13,000 square feet of impact is likely, considering the length of that existing driveway that you already have that would need improvement.
I actually talked to fire rescue staff when we were out visiting the site, and that particular path to the pond was mainly more of importance for ambulance access than for major fire equipment.
Right. That's what I
except to
said.
say that there could be a dry hydrant there. So yeah, it would be most likely porous pavers.
Okay, and that is something that I guess the Board of Supervisors, if it chose, someday could require.
Yes.
But I don't know if we can. I mean, the cost is like many, many times more than paving. So that's going to be interesting. All right, I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Mr. Keller had his hand up.
Mr. Keller, you have your hand up?
Yes. Scott, could you put up the staff recommendations for, let's call them conditions?
Oh, I see.
And could we look at C? The maximum occupancy during camp months cannot exceed 65 people. I think we need a clarification. That means at one time, or do you mean in the whole June through August, there can only be 65 visitors there?
No, it's we always structure these conditions as at one time.
So that needs to be clarified.
Yeah, this is just a summary version. This isn't the condition itself.
Okay, good. Okay. Does the condition itself clarify that?
By the time it gets to the commission and the board, it will. Yeah, there'll be really
Okay.
much more detail than this.
And D, we could look at D. Prohibit additional land clearing activities. And it says for this use, but I think, again, in the final recommendations, we need to make a clarification because I see there are a number of less steep grade areas in both of the two parcels that obviously were cultivated lands, at a minimum grasslands, but not in forest at one point. And I think that all of us would like to see more agricultural uses back on these parcels. And so if the applicant or their successors had an interest in bringing land out of forestry and into agriculture that may indeed complement this kind of use or another, there needs to be a clarification that this isn't against land clearing in general, especially if the land clearing is in support of agriculture.
Yeah, and we would make that more, I mean, that's why we said for this use, but we certainly would make that more clear in the final version of the conditions. As if we had put those fully drafted conditions in here, you would have had many, many more pages to look at, but this is just a summary version again.
Those are my initial comments. Thank you.
All right, anybody else on the committee have any questions or comments they'd like to bring forward?
I guess I'll just jump in for a minute to say that to me, the Ag Forestry District's highest and best use for an existing forestry block is to stay a forestry block. And that fragmentation is a supreme problem when you chop up forest into little bitty things. Has a much greater impact there than it does moving around little pieces of agricultural land. So I guess I would be much more in favor of taking the applicants at their word to say they're not going to, and that's what they're stipulating, then that's what I would be looking for sometime way in the future, if we get to that point for the for conditions. Just so that's out there at the beginning.
I also have a question, I guess, for the applicants here. I'm looking at, a swimming pool and tennis courts and wondering if you would consider not doing that kind of recreational development and instead relying on the abundant natural resources that are already existent on the property and making the most of what's already there for recreation instead of doing further development.
Hi, thank you again for having us. Yeah, we totally understand that concern. Part of the idea of having a paved surface kind of closer to the child area is that we do serve children in wheelchairs and who need ADA accessible pavers and ways to do that. And so a lot of what we want to be able to create for them is, yes, creating space in nature and healing in nature, but also the idea that if a child in a wheelchair needs access to the ability to play basketball or something where they could participate with peers, we want to make that accessible to every child who comes to our camp, not just those who are mobile. And so that's kind of where the idea of the basketball court came in, where it would serve multi-purpose as just kind of a flat open space that's paved without terrain to help with those who may need a little bit more assistance in terms of recreational activities. And then in terms of the pool, we want, again, every child to be able to access water play. And so for those who may need a lift to get in and out of the pool due to immobility or wheelchair bound children, we want to make water play accessible to them just as much as the other kids who would attend camp. So while we plan to utilize the lake and fishing and gardening and a lot of the other natural resources that are already on the land as part of our camp activities, we also want to make sure that a lot of these children who can't attend camp anywhere, our goal is to create this space for them in their community, in the county, so that they also have access to existing peer-related activities.
Thank you. I think that's a really great response. I'm definitely for making things accessible. I would just encourage you guys to think more innovatively. It seems like if you put a little bit more creativity into your concepts here, that you could come up with something that is more suitable for the environment that exists and also accomplishes those goals that you guys have.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, Bruce, I see you on the screen.
Yes, thanks, David. First, I just want to say to the Stevens, I think it's a wonderful camp idea, and I applaud them for wanting to do this. However, what's going on in my mind, does this fit the definitions of an AFD? And I don't think it does. So I don't know if we can get through option B in my mind to make so many modifications to the proposal. Now, my only other comment is just, whenever there's changes, to always take into consideration stakeholders and neighbors' concern. I just wanted to say that comment. I think what you're proposing is a wonderful idea, especially for the population you're looking to cater to. But is this agricultural and forestal district anymore? If it's created, I don't know. I don't think so.
Thank you, Bruce.
David, can I jump in?
Absolutely.
So question, really starting at the top on the idea of a more intensive use. The part I'm looking for some explanation either from staff or statutory interpretation. It kind of seems circular that intensive use is, especially whatever the special permit might say. A special permit, if it's approved, that means kind of by definition, it's not a more intensive use. Is a daycare or boarding camp, is that kind of by definition or by staff recommendation, not a more intensive use?
No, that's not really how. Sorry, I had a few overlapping sounds there. No, there's no predetermination of that. It's case by case. And again, the finding that the board needs to make is that any particular proposal is consistent with those purposes of the districts. And because it's case by case like that, that's why we need to come to you all before we go to the commission and the board, is to get that sense of, there could be 20 different camp uses and every one of them would have different impacts on the districts or have different levels of appropriateness within the districts. So that's what we're focused on, is getting that advisory comment from you all.
Fair enough. And without putting words in the staff's mouth, is it fair to conclude that the staff is recommending, whichever is the appropriate word, that the changes that they're recommending gets it to a point where they feel they get supported as not being a more intensive use?
Well, certainly we felt that it was not directly supportive as proposed. I'm not sure that we were able to make a firm conclusion on what level of changes would be enough, which again is why we have advisory committees, is you all are the experts we want to consult with. So no, I don't think we're leading you toward any particular conclusion, except that the original proposal without changes would not be appropriate to our minds. And we're just trying to work out for the applicants, for the committees, what, if anything, would be.
I think I understand. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, just to clarify for Ron, as a person who's served on the Planning Commission for a number of years, I think that when staff is of a single mind, there's a recommendation from staff. And in this case, they are reaching out to this body for a recommendation. They're giving it their first shot and coming to this body to make the recommendation.
I appreciate that. And I think that's where I was getting to. It'd be my general inclination, if the staff made a recommendation, I'd have to have a strong reason or purpose or conflict to want to go against that recommendation. But the sense I got from all this is that they're not sure themselves if it's kind of met that burden. Again, without putting words in anybody's mouth, but I think I get what you're saying there.
I think I'd like to add to that, we're kind of at the beginning of the process. Staff hasn't really formed an opinion. We haven't gotten the Stevens have said that they wish to provide a revised version. So this is kind of trying to get all of the comments together, if you will, and then staff will have a recommendation once there's kind of a final draft and we've been able to review it and consider it. So that's, at this point, we're considering it still under review and a final recommendation hasn't been made at this point. But to add to what Scott and Tim said, yes, this is kind of staff's first shot at what we think needs to change, but what is AFD's? What is your guidance and recommendation?
Go ahead, Ann, I think.
Thank you. So now I'm beginning to wrap my brain around the fact that we really need to be focused on the concept of, is an additional between 13 and 20,000 square feet of construction actually consistent with leaving something alone, which is what the definition of an agricultural district is, of when it's not an agricultural building. So that's one question. And then the second thing I guess we all have to do is to gather up, or help Mariah gather up all of the concerns we might have that then they would have to address. Because right now I feel as if we're all shooting in the dark here. We don't have details, we don't have answers to some of the questions we've already asked because it's early. So I think we have to be very careful not to think all the questions are going to be answered, I guess. I'm very nervous about doing that at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Any other discussion at this point? If not, Scott, I think we might open it up to public comment. So any other hands raised?
Ken would
see
like.
Tim. Okay, thank you.
Just to follow up on Ann, I think that this body is really fortunate to have a representative of both the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors on it. So the history of what has occurred in the discussions here and the public involvement and the applicants' thoughts are all going to move up through the chain. And I think that that's a very helpful and good process. And that to remember that, as David said, there is a specific, and Scott said, there is a specific purpose in our review in terms of just the Ag and Forestal District and those points that we're supposed to do the evaluation on here. Often 3 bodies have 3 different recommendations, and ultimately it's the Board of Supervisors that must cull through all of that and make that final decision.
Thank you, Tim. Did I see your hand raised, Bruce?
Yes, thanks, David. For the benefit of the other board members, Scott, can you put up the 3 options that staff has proposed, the A, B, and C one more time?
Sure, just a second.
Thanks.
Did you have a question about those, or did you just want to review them?
Yeah, just wanted to review them again, and just also for our fellow board members to take a look at that again. Any questions from fellow board members or other comments?
And again, to summarize, the 3 options we've laid out here are to find that it would be consistent if staff's recommendations were applied, to find that it would be consistent with those and additional changes recommended by the committee, which we would need to be fairly specific, or finally see that the committee doesn't believe that this use can be found consistent with the purposes of the districts. Yeah, if there's no further comments from the committee, maybe we should go ahead and go on to the public comment. Stop sharing that for the moment. Carolyn, do you want to go ahead and do the introduction for how we're going to handle the?
When I unmute you, you will have, we ask you to please state your name and address if you're affiliated with a group or association. And then as soon as you start talking, your timed 2 minutes starts. And when your time is up, I will interrupt you and tell you that your time is up. Right now, we only have 1 person with their hand up. Melanie, you can go ahead and get started.
Hi, thanks, Carolyn. My name is Melanie Van Royen. I live at 2310 Monacan Trail Road, which is the driveway just north of the subject properties. And I would just like to provide additional comments for consideration from what has been discussed. I think it's important to understand that these subject properties are not just within the hardware ag forestal district, but are actually surrounded by other properties in the same district, as well as properties that are under stricter development restrictions because of conservation and historic easements. So from a development perspective, just this is very inconsistent with the surrounding areas and just the neighborhood in itself. Sorry, I wasn't expecting to talk first. One of the other things I wanted to just mention is I was fortunate to be part of the community meeting to seek clarification on the proposal itself. Kind of like what you've all said, there are just a lot of questions still out there. But I think the important thing to note is that I know that I and my neighbors feel really, really strongly that the mission of this organization is really phenomenal and fantastic. And it's been it's been great to learn more about their organization. But what's important to me as I learn more about this decision and kind of what goes behind it is around, it's not about how great the organization is. It's about, is this the appropriate use for and purpose for this land in this particular location? And kind of like some of the comments the committee made today, I'm struggling to really see how a day camp and a boarding camp and a large event space is not in itself more intense use of this area.
I'm sorry, but your 2 minutes is up. Scott,
Okay, thank you.
I don't have anybody else with their hand raised at this time. Oh, wait, one more. Got one. William, please state your name and address. Your time starts as soon as you start speaking.
Okay, thanks very much. Hi, my name is William Izzard, and I'm a little disorganized because I didn't think this was open for public comments tonight, but good evening, everybody. My wife and our family is in the adjoining driveway right next to the camp, and it's a beautiful part of the county. And I want to echo what Melanie said about the Stevens. The Stevens are great people, and they have a great idea, but I just think it's in the wrong place. So we run about 1/2 mile. We'll share a driveway, and our house and our yard and the like will look into their upper development where they're planning a lot of additional structures, activities, et cetera. So we're really concerned about how these 53 acres are going to very quickly transfer from an ag rural use to something that I think is commercial. And the reason why I think it's commercial is that when you have 65 daily guests there, and that's indicative of a commercial activity. When you're taking overnight guests, that is commercial. When you're producing food and feeding people, that is very much commercial. So this is a low density part of the county, and that's consistent with what, some of the guiding principles of your committee. If this commercial operation is allowed to go in next door, it's going to be intense from a development perspective, and even more intense from a people perspective. It'll be 10 to 15 to 1. So thank you very much. And we look forward to hearing your decision.
At this time, I do not have anyone else with hand raised. I'll turn it back over to you, Scott, to the committee to take over.
Okay,
Muted,
thank you.
Scott.
Yes, ma'am, Ann.
I just wanted to make sure that everyone on the committee had received the emails from neighbors over the last week or so. And they're all included, I'm sure, in our written packet, but many of the same issues were described. And I think they're very telling and direct about what they hope we will consider. I just wanted to have as a comparison, a winery with its improvements, which is legislatively protected to have and is based upon growing the grapes to make the wine on site, is allowed 50 trips per day or 25 vehicles in order to stay under the level where it requires a whole lot more legislative action and improvements and turn lanes and all sorts of other sort of things that make it available to cover that extra density. And yet we're looking at 65 people, which might be more than 100 vehicles in and out per day. Each trip, in is a trip and out is a trip according to VDOT. So I don't think this is incidental. This is different than having a kindergarten class from a school come out once a summer and see the cows or something like that, where that is something no one would ever know. So I am concerned personally about the intensity of it as someone who lives in a different agricultural district. I think that the neighbors around me would also be concerned. They all wanted to know, how many people are coming to pick up beef at my place. And I said 12 per year. And they went, oh, okay, that's no problem. But 65 a day is a different level of intensive action on the place. So I just wanted to make sure that that comparison was out there for people to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. I see both the Stevens hands up and Mr. Bear's hand up. If you'll bear with me, Mr. Stevens, Mrs. Stevens, let me call on Ben and I'll get back to you in just a second. Ben?
So, a lot of great commentary tonight. I want to thank everyone that, wrote us emails, sharing their thoughts, and the folks that shared their thoughts tonight. I just want to share my 2 cents. I respect the proposal and appreciate what the applicants are trying to do here. But I think about my purpose on this committee and living in an AFD myself, and I have to think, my goal here is to uphold the mission of our AFDs. And so, our goal on this committee, we're supposed to look at these proposals and ask ourselves that question. So I asked myself that question here, and for me, it's no, it doesn't at all. Even with the staff recommendations, I struggled to see how this proposal is in line with the mission of our AFDs in the area, and I just can't get there. Thank you.
Thank you. Stevens?
Hi, thank you, everybody. I just wanted to clarify a few things. First of all, for our proposal, 75% of the year is meant to just be a respite facility for families. So we would have no more than 6 household families per week. So that means 12 adults and their respective children. That would be the most intensive use we would have 75% of the year. And I think even if this property was mine and I just had friends over for weekly gatherings, that would be roughly the same. So I just want to clarify, like 65 families or people a day is not the intent. We had to put in our special use permit the maximum number of people we would ever have on the property, because if we want to have more down the road, we'd have to redo this whole process all over again. So those numbers are the maximum we would ever potentially have in the entire growth of our camp. And honestly, the families that we serve, the goal is to have peace in nature. So we have quiet hours elicited. We would have a maximum of roughly 6 to 10 cars if we had all 6 families there in 1 week. But ideally, the goal would be to have 1 to 3 families per week as a place for them to come rest during periods of intense crisis with their children, during periods of medical hardship where they need to have time in nature. But the intent is not to have 65 people per day. When that number is thrown out, that is for our summer camp, and that normally runs 8 weeks in the summer as our maximum number of campers. This summer we had 35, so that 65 number would include therapists on site who help with the children, our staff, as well as kids. And I will say, to the car aspect, most of these families have 3 to 4 children in their household family. So it wouldn't be 1 car per child. We're looking at maybe 1 car for 5 children, or carpooling. And that's what we've done every year we've had camp. So I just wanted to clarify a little bit on the numbers, because our goal is not to have a ton of people on the property. The goal is to create a healing space in nature where families who are walking through severe mental health crisis, or who are trying to minimize sending their child to a residential institution, would have a space to come get therapeutic healing in nature in a quiet environment with therapeutic support. So I just wanted to clarify all those numbers being thrown out there. That is not the intent of the property or our proposal. But we had to put in the highest numbers we would ever potentially want to have for the entirety of our time on the property. So I just wanted to clarify those things, just in terms of, we do intend to have chickens and equine assisted therapy and horses and gardening and a lot of other just natural resources available on the property for our families to utilize during their stay.
Thank you for the clarification. Any other comments from the committee? Yes,
I just, we don't have, Scott, and Mariah, we don't have legal counsel this evening, correct?
No, we don't, sorry.
So again, just the clarification for everyone, special use permits, run with the land. And so things that do receive a special use permit, it's not tied to the individual applicant and ends when that applicant changes. It continues with that property with the next applicant. So it's, I think, our responsibility to, and I certainly appreciate what the applicants are trying to achieve, but we need to understand that this, because of the generic nature that it will be written in by staff, it will be done in such a way that these kinds of uses, not specific necessarily to this particular proposal, will continue on this land in perpetuity.
If I could ask, there seems to be a question about the number of people coming. And I think the comparison to a winery was a very good one. How many people are often traveling to wineries during the summer? If there's a question about, does the number of people make this inconsistent? I would wonder if there is a number of people that would make it more consistent, and what or range or number that would be. If that's the only concern I get, well, I realize it's one of the concerns.
Right. Thank you. I don't know. Certainly, I don't have an answer for a number for an ag forestal district. The number of people that is a little bit outside the purpose of ag forestal district, in my opinion, to determine numbers of individuals. Unless some of my committee members have an opinion they're willing to share. Are there any other points of discussion? If not, Scott, could you put those 3 potential action items back on screen, please?
Sure. Here we go.
So at this point, it seems like discussion is starting to, we've asked a lot of questions. So is there any additional points that members of the committee would like to make?
One other just point of comparison, and that is that many conservation easement holders limit structures to 3,000 square feet because of not wanting to change the character of the rural surroundings. So that's, I think, why I was getting at that 14,000 square feet of buildings plus the improved other activity levels as really being very large as far as its impact on the land compared to others around. So I'll just throw that out there too for people to think about.
Thank you, Ann. Have we reached a point where we would like to consider either one of these 3 action items on screen or proposing an additional or separate action item?
I think you could poll the group, find out.
Someone would like to make a motion.
I'll entertain a motion at this point if the committee is willing.
Go, Ben.
I guess I'll make a motion that I find the proposal cannot be made consistent with the purposes of the district.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion on the table that the proposal cannot be made consistent with the purposes of the ag forestal district. Do I hear a second from the committee?
I'll second that.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Any final discussion before we call the question?
I'm still struggling with 3K, and apologies. it seems if the Board of Supervisors says that the special use permit is not an intensive use, it overrules kind of everything else in the statute. Am I interpreting that correctly?
No, let me try to explain that again. It's an odd structure for an ordinance. Instead of saying you can do A, B, or C, it says you can't do anything except there's a bunch of exceptions. And that exception is, for example, anything that's by right in the rural areas section of the zoning ordinance is permitted by ordinance in these districts. However, there's two categories of uses. There's by right, which again is mandated to be permitted in the districts.
Understood.
And then the other category is uses by special use permit, which is already a higher legislative bar for approval. But what 3K establishes is that the board would have to make a finding that the use, it's not that if they approve it, it is consistent. It's they should only be approving it if they actively find that it's consistent. It pushes them the position of saying if somebody proposes an ag packing facility, then they would find that consistent. That seems reasonable. If somebody proposes a uranium mine and they find that to be consistent, it seems awfully sketchy. Most of our proposals fall somewhere in between. But the board is making an extra finding on top of their normal findings that they make for approving a special use permit.
I think I'm with you there.
I'll just add one other element is that in a special permit category, it is something which would be allowed in general in the district, but it needs extra conditions to make its impact something that its neighbors can live with. It's not something that is outside the purview of the district or in a place where it doesn't belong. That a special permit would have to be. Otherwise, it would have to get a rezoning and a whole new category of everything. So I think that's even more narrow than just that the board, I mean, the board could truly decide to do anything it wants, which is a fairly terrifying prospect to me. But in this case, there are boundary restrictions, and some of them actually, I think, probably came from the state statute that allowed these districts to be created to begin with.
Thank you, Ann. I think I see your hand up also, Bruce.
Yes, thank you, David. I just want to make a final comment before the vote. I do wish Stevens luck with their proposal, and I hope it comes to fruition in a manner that's agreeable to stakeholders in the area. However, I just feel like we have a responsibility on this board to be consistent with the definitions of the district. That being said, I think this camp does come to fruition one day outside of a district. It'll be a wonderful resource for children, but I do hope it can come about in a way that's may not be a win-win situation for everyone, but at least there's more dialogue, and I do appreciate them doing the work now to have that dialogue. That's it.
Thank you, Bruce. Tim, you have your hand up as well.
Yes, I would just like to say that there are other creative ways to deal with this, and I think that we need to be focusing on what the constraints are of the Ag and Forestal District Committee. We have a number of interesting proposals that come through where applicants have withdrawn from Ag and Forestal so that they actually have more, that they don't have to face this hurdle. So there are options to the applicant beyond this particular piece.
Tim, I agree.
Thank you, Tim. I don't see any other members with their hands up, so I will call the question. Scott, would you do the roll call, please?
Thank you. All right, so the motion is for the committee to find option C, that the proposal cannot be made consistent. So I'll go down the roll. Mr. Baer?
Yes.
Mr. Goldberg?
No.
Mr. Keller,
Could you restate what it is we've not, so that I know what I'm voting on?
okay. The motion is to find that the proposal is not consistent or cannot be made consistent with the purposes of the districts. In other words, put in more basic terms, it would be a recommendation for denial.
Are
Yes.
we, oh, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I know that Greg Camner always wants us to have a motion in the affirmative. So, or something very clear. So how,
The original wording of the motion was that to find the proposal cannot be made consistent with the purposes of the districts. That's
Okay.
fairly direct.
very good.
And my understanding of that is there's nothing that could be done in any way, shape, or form. That's how I read that.
Recommended changes would not make the use consistent.
The recommended changes, that's right.
I don't see where it says recommended. I
know.
don't see that. That this,
I think what would be what would really be helpful, Scott, is if you would you or Mariah would type this up and put it on the screen for us. That's what we usually do when we have these kinds of changes in the planning commission. And I think it would be helpful to all of us.
Give me just a moment and I will type something up and perhaps I can make something more clear and Bear can let us know if he agrees to amend his motion to a different wording. So just a moment here. Apologize for making you all wait while I type.
can we talk while you type?
Yes.
Beyond my understanding of Robert's Rules of Order, so I would open that up.
All right, just a second here. It's always interesting doing this online. For example, you could make a motion like this. And Mr. Bear's motion is already on the table. He can state if he would like to either retract his motion or amend his motion for clarity.
So I guess I will amend my motion to instead move that the committee recommend denial of the application as it is not consistent with the purposes of the districts.
Quick question, well, if we're going to work on rewording it, do we need to put ag-forestal districts in this, or is that just accepted?
The agricultural technology, we can do exactly that. I can work on it.
And by proposal, we're talking about by the application, we're talking about the proposal as modified by the staff recommendations.
Or as presented.
Well, I don't think the staff recommendations are not really relevant if you all feel that the use is not appropriate for the districts.
There we go.
We're evaluating this without the staff recommendations or any, right? Or even, I think I get that.
Scott, can you put 2 more zeros between?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
So at this point, we have a proposed amended.
Right, so I think we need a second for amending the motion.
Ben, are you still willing to bring this forward as an amended motion?
I am, yeah.
So now we need to have a second.
I second it.
Amended
I second
motion.
it. Elizabeth Sutphen.
Thank you. So now that we have amended the initial motion, I'll open it up for discussion one more time. Are there any other final points that members would like to make on the committee? Not seeing any hands being raised or hearing any voices, I will.
Just jumping in. I mean, my understanding of this allows the ability for continued discussions about reducing the impact. Or is this an ultimate? There's no changes. There's no recommendations. There's nothing that could be done.
What you all are doing is providing an advisory comment to the commission and the board. The process will continue. The applicants have the option of amending their application. They could, even if they feel they've, no, this doesn't make sense. They could ask to come back to you all, but essentially this motion is that even if there were significant changes to the motion, to the application, the use in general would not be consistent with the purposes of the district. So your motion, your action does not stop the process in any way, but it does provide an important advisory comment to the commission and the board.
And again, that's my, sorry guys, that's my struggle is there may be changes. I'm looking at option B. There may be changes. I don't know how to articulate them. I don't want to get into that, but I think I'm good. We can go ahead.
Let's call the question.
Could I just for Ron's, could I just throw something out here? When our council and the planning commission is asked that when an individual votes against a motion, that they clarify their reasons for it. So if quickly you could, if you elected not to support this, if you could state why or what you think could happen, then that becomes part of the record. And that is passed on then to the next body.
Perfect.
I'll just add one other fact, and that is that all we have to deal with is the information we are given, which is not always the information that would be perfect, but it's all we have at every stage along the way. So this is basically the information we have to work with today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Last chance. All right, Scott, let's do roll call vote again.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Bear.
Yes.
Mr. Goldberg.
No, and my clarification would be that I believe the proposal as presented without ignoring the staff recommendations is, I believe, a more intensive use, and that's not to preclude the possibility that the applicant and staff could come back with something that we all felt, or I personally felt, met the burden that it was not a more intensive use.
Okay. Mr. Keller. Mr. Keller.
Yes.
Ms. Kirchner.
I vote yes. I believe the mission and the proposal, while meaningful, is incongruent with conservation, protection, and/or production of food and other agricultural or forestal products.
Ms. Malik.
Yes.
Mr. Powell.
Yes.
Mr. Vilk.
Yes.
And I believe Ms. Sutphen is now here.
Yes.
Back with her. All right, so thank you all for that discussion. Your recommendation will be forwarded along to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors as part of this review process for further decision making. And thank you for the detailed discussion. All right. so I think we can now move on to the next item on the agenda. Thank Stevens and everyone for attending and helping out with that discussion.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. 2 points, and Mariah, we'll take this probably up with you. I heard a lot of our mission's great. So my question would be, if not here, then where else in the county would this be supported? And then also the fact that the special use does have to carry with the property, that seems even more open than if it just carried with the current owners. So is there another option for, it could have been if we had to sell it in 2 years or something happened to us, we would be totally fine with that going away. So it seems like it makes it even harder to get a special use permit, even if it is for a special use permit or whatever we would call that. So those would be my only comments. Obviously, extremely disappointed in your decision. Understand the process, all the positions you're put in, but I would ask for action beyond just we think the organization is great, and that's recommendations for where else we can go or what else we can do to help these families within Albemarle County, because we've heard the suggestion to go to other counties plenty of times. That's not where we live. That's not where any of you guys live. That's not where these families live. So I hate for them to have to go over county lines to get services like this when there's plenty of land, there's plenty of available resources inside of Albemarle County. If we can figure out how to tap into them.
I'm sure the county, beyond even just the community development department, will be happy to work on that discussion. As far as the question about permits running with the land, unfortunately, that's just a fact of Virginia law that we have to deal with. That it's not really possible for us to issue permits to one owner or one organization. It really has to be to a use category with certain restrictions. So that is a difficulty, but that's something that's a consistent difficulty across the state.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I believe our next agenda item is the Glen Oaks District Review.
Yes, that's right. Just a moment to get this working. Go. Alrighty. So this is the periodic review for the Glen Oaks District, which is located on the main stem Urbana River, just on the east side of the Glenmore or Village of Urbana development area. It's a 353.8 acre district with 237 acres of important soils. There's only 2 dwellings in it at the moment. And there is one parcel, which is this, my pointer will work, this central parcel here is actually also under a conservation easement. We have not received any withdrawal requests for this district. Of the 5 parcels in this district, and my numbers all went away. That's very strange. I apologize for that. These parcels range from roughly 6 or so acres to 21 to 43 or 44 acres. I have no idea why everything went to 0 on my table, but in any case, the point being that the development rights is accurate. None of these parcels that are in the open space text category have any small lot development rights. This means that the appropriate review period for this district is 5 years, and that if the board agrees on that 5-year renewal, we would immediately notify those 4 parcel owners that they are subject to potential withdrawal from the district in a 5-year period, and that they would need to find some other way of, they would either need to start paying full rate taxes or they would need to find some other way of securing a qualification for use value taxation. This is probably a standout in terms of districts that aren't particularly effective, in that, except for that parcel that's already under easement, the other parcels are not limiting any amount of residential development in the rural areas. So staff recommends that the committee recommend renewal of this district for a 5-year period. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Scott. Any questions or comments from the committee? Ann, I see your hand up.
Thank you. I guess of the 237 acres, it looks like a lot of it is qualifying for land use in other proper ways, like ag and forestry. And it's only the open space one, whichever one that is really in jeopardy. I do hope that between now and 5 years, we will find other ways for open space people to sign up for stewardship and get other programs recognized so that we're solving this problem. But
I do as well.
I
Sorry.
agree with the 5 years, because I think we have to winnow a way out the properties wherever they are that are using agriforestal as a way to qualify for land use when there's no stewardship and no farming going on. And these people are sort of caught in the middle. They've already conserved part of it and they're using part of it. So I hope that they will continue to qualify for land use and they will not have any impacts at all from this decision. Thank you.
And just to clarify a second, sorry to interrupt, but just to clarify, there are 5 parcels. I believe it's 5 different owners. Can't recall for sure. This middle parcel that's under easement is not taxed in use value taxation, but is taxed at the easement rate. The other 4 parcels are qualifying for the open space tax category through being in the district and are not doing agriculture or forestry that we're aware of. So
Thank you. I misunderstood the statement in the paragraph. Thank you very much.
no, that's my fault. Sorry about that.
I'll jump in if there's a. My understanding is that there's the 4 listed properties with 0 development rights. At the end of 5 years, they would be, I hate to say kicked out, but kicked out because they have no development rights.
Right, but that's what the board would be able to do, and they would alert people of that possibility. The reason I'm hesitating is that, of course, the current board and the assessor's office saying this can't say the board will remove you, because the board in 5 years might change their mind, but they're likely to be removed.
It's been our consistent position that if you don't have development rights, you can't be in an ag forest district. Can there be an ag forest district with just 1 property, and or does the 5 years give opportunity to bring other properties into the ag forest district? This question is, do we terminate it or do we just extend it? That's why I'm asking these questions.
Yeah, well, we're recommending against immediate termination of districts because of the tax impacts on the landowners. They would be subject to 5 years of rollback taxes, a full rate rollback taxes and interest. So essentially 6 or so years of taxes all at once with no warning. So we've been consistently recommending against that. And that's why we're doing this shorter renewal to give people time to either qualify a different way or go back to paying full rate so they don't have rollback at the end of that 5 years.
I was reading this, that Board of Supervisors could consider terminating it after the 5-year renewal period. That's
right. Yeah, and that would have the same effect essentially. But terminating it now would be much more of a problem.
So what people have to do is when they get their letter, then the following year they would pay their regular tax rate. And they do that for 5
I've been in
years.
that position, and I totally understand that.
Okay, and then they don't have to pay the 10% times 10% time,
Again, I've had that property happen to me. The question is, I'm just reading the paragraph, given this district's lack of effectively protected parcels, the Board of Supervisors could consider terminating it after the 5-year renewal period. And that parenthetical suggests that those landowners would not be punished if they would not be subject to rollback taxes.
That's right.
And so the question is, if there's something that can happen in the next 5 years that could allow the district to continue, that's great. I mean, if having 1 parcel in the district is sufficient, that's great. If the 5 years gives us that 1 landowner time to find other people to come into the district to meet the threshold, I don't know the exact rules. That's my question.
I mean, I have to tell you, after 22 years doing this, it feels very wrong to me to suggest that a district might go away.
Well, sure.
But the fact is that if we've got a 1 parcel district and that 1 parcel is under a more restrictive conservation easement, the district's not doing anything. On the other hand, if that 1 central landowner or others in the area could get other properties that do have development potential into the district, then sure, we can consider continuing it with all of them included. It's hard to say which will happen.
But I bet a district with one parcel doesn't.
We have one.
Oh.
Yeah, you can't start one that way, but you could end up with one through withdrawals.
I'm good.
Right,
I'm sorry.
You raised the hand as well.
I'd just like to, again, clarify that there are opportunities for both agriculture and forestry uses, and these parcels could be creatively worked with to meet the category, and then they wouldn't fit in this potential delisting category that open space has. The state, the Commonwealth, gives us a better definition that the county has worked with for agriculture and what defines agriculture and what defines forestry, and actually horticulture for that matter, than it does for open space. And that's really where the rub comes in on a lot of this.
Yeah, that's definitely true. If these parcels find other ways to qualify, we're only looking at removing parcels that are in the open space category with no development rights. If they're farming, there's no tax-based or other reason to remove them from the district.
Right. My personal hope is that we could go in another direction in the 5 years and build the districts up. So there is perhaps an opportunity to expand this and or other districts and solve the question of a couple of these parcels that have these questions.
Yeah, and then it would be great if we had the additional staff to do the outreach. Something we're really lacking in is outreach capacity to directly contact landowners and encourage enrollment in programs like this and other ones.
I agree. I can't see everybody's face on screen right now, so I'd ask you to, if you have a comment, use your raise a hand button on the computer to alert me. I'm not trying to leave anybody out. If there's no more discussion, I'll entertain committee's motion on how to move forward with this review.
I would move we approve the Glen Oaks district for 5 years.
I second the motion.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry, who seconded there? I heard a couple of voices. Bruce.
A second, I think Ron said something else.
I guess I thirded it.
Third, okay. Second.
We're third of the way through the voice, or then, right? So we have a motion on the table to approve this district for another 5 years, and it's been seconded. Any discussion? Let's call the question then. Scott?
I will call the roll again. Mr. Bear.
Yes.
Mr. Goldberg.
Yes.
Mr. Keller.
Yes.
Ms. Kirchner.
Yes.
Ms. Malik.
Yes.
Mr. Powell.
Yes.
Mr. Vilk.
Yes.
And Ms. Sutphin.
Yes.
I apologize for the echo. I'm not sure where that's coming from. Thank you all. All right. So next item on the agenda would be the Connor Free Union Edition.
Well, I like the word see an addition on some of these things personally.
All right, this is a proposal to add a parcel to the Free Union District. It's a parcel containing 33.9 acres of important soils. And one complication here is that this parcel is located more than 1 mile from the original core of the district. You all have seen this once or twice before, that the recent changes to the state Ag 4 district code allowed localities to add parcels to districts if they find, or if they make a finding that the land is agriculturally significant, given the high proportion of important soils in this property. Staff would support that finding. property has 2 development rights. And staff recommends that the committee make the finding that proposed addition contains agriculturally and forestally significant land, and recommend approval of the proposed addition.
Thank you, Scott. Any discussion?
I support this, and I think that it is the same property where they restored a historic cabin and was adopted into the National Historic Register. So fantastic.
Oh.
I think that's right.
Interesting. Any other comments or discussion? I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we approve for 10 years. No, I'm sorry. I move that we approve the addition of the Connor property to the Free Union District.
Second.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the table and a second that we approve the addition. Any last minute comments? Scott, when you're ready, please.
Mr. Bear.
Yes.
Mr. Goldberg.
Yes.
Mr. Keller.
Yes.
Ms. Kirchner.
Yes.
Ms. Malik.
Yes.
Mr. Powell.
Yes.
Mr. Volk.
Yes.
And Ms. Sutphin.
Yes.
Alrighty. And as Ms. Malik pointed out earlier, our next item is very confusingly named is the Mormon addition to the Blue Run District. The family name is Mormon. So it is not an addition to the Mormons River District, but to the Blue Run District. And here's the existing Blue Run District in green on your map. I will point out the red is the proposed addition. Just west and even farther from the district is the first parcel that this committee recommended for approval beyond a mile from the core, as it was agriculturally significant. I would say that today's proposed addition is significantly more significant than that one, that it is a 248 acre property that is almost entirely made up of prime and locally important soils. So again, the finding of agriculturally significant is appropriate. Each of these 5 parcels has 5 development rates, so there is quite a bit of potential there to be protected by the districts. And again, staff would recommend that the committee make the finding that the addition contains agriculturally and forestally significant land and recommend approval of the proposed addition.
Thank you, Scott. Any discussion, comments?
I move that we approve the proposed addition.
Thank you, Ron. Is there a second?
Yes.
All right, and so we have a motion on the table to approve the addition, the Mormon Blue Run addition. So Scott, when you're ready to call the question.
Ready. Consistent here. Mr. Bear.
Yes.
Mr. Goldberg.
Yes.
Mr. Keller.
Yes.
Ms. Kirchner.
Yes.
Ms. Malik.
Yes.
Mr. Powell.
Yes.
Mr. Duck.
Yes.
And Ms. Sutphin.
Yes.
Thank you all. Passes. And here is the remainder of our agenda.
Okay, so we've worked through the items. It brings us down to new business. Is there any new business that members of the committee would like to bring before us?
The only comment I have is how important it is that this committee is doing its work, because there is more and more pressure every time you turn around to sort of make up our rules, different day, different things. So having this structure and these commitments to properties over a long period of time is really, really important for our future. And I thank all of you for your work.
I agree. And it's difficult to turn away worthy causes sometimes, but we have a very narrow definition and scope to work within, and I appreciate everybody recognizing that. Here are no new business. I'll move on to old business. Do we need to revisit any other items that we've discussed previously?
I don't have any.
I guess just one thing, Scott, you've talked about at some point in the relatively near future, possibly having a presentation for a number of the groups on the various easement acquisition programs and ag and forestal. And I think it would be useful for this body to be on that list that would get that brief presentation and sort of put the ag and forestal in the context. We heard references to the easement programs this evening. Thank you.
Sure. Right. Thank you.
Any other old business? Well, I will entertain a motion for adjournment. We have done a lot of work tonight, and I appreciate everybody pitching in.
Good night, everybody. Stay dry. That's my
We'll take that
adjournment.
we'll take that as a motion for adjournment. All
That a motion of
I second that
adjournment?
motion.
right.
I'm
No
outta
vote is
here.
needed on that. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Have a good
Have a
night.